I said, I've been working in the land use policy arena in Montana for about 25 years. And there was always one issue that really bedeviled those of us who were trying to protect agriculture, wildlife from rural sprawl development. And that issue was a thing called exempt wells. Exempt wells essentially make it easier and cheaper to do the sort of development that our communities say they don't want, sprawling out and taking up agricultural land, water, and wildlife. But we didn't make a lot of progress, honestly. And then about a year and a half ago, we read about this major court case in Broadwater County, Montana, that direct assault on exempt wells, a major sweeping ruling that is going to result in less sprawl and more water for our habitat, for our wildlife. So I had to find out, well, who is this guy? His name is Guy Alsentzer, right? And so looked him up, gave him a call, and soon found that he and his organization, Upper Missouri Waterkeeper, are really simpatico with Friends of Park County and our work and our mission. So since then, we've done a couple of podcasts with Guy. He's the one who has, kept us informed about legislation. Those guys are up there on the legislature every day, beating back big, bad bills, bad for conservation, bad for agriculture. And so we just, deeply admire him. And Guy is, all around chum to us. He's a skilled attorney, a great speaker, and a really good lobbyist. So, Guy Alsentzer.
Okay. I'm not sure which mic I'm supposed to speak into, so I'm just going to go with the one that's in my hand. Thank you for the kind introductions. Guy Alsentzer. I am the executive director of Upper Missouri Waterkeeper. We're a 501c3. We do river protection work throughout the 25,000 square miles of the Upper Missouri River Basin. But I'm also the sole practitioner at Alsentzer Law Office, and all of that to say I'm a recovering attorney, right? Yeah, you never really get out of it until you quit practicing. And why am I here tonight? Well, I think Randy did a good introduction. The Horse Creek Hills case in Broadwater County is a part of it. Something else that's a part of it is what the organization, our 501c3 at Waterkeeper, is trying to do to better the tools in our tool belt in terms of protecting our outdoors heritage, in terms of protecting the values that we all, I believe, share. But also, I'm here tonight to talk about and do a little bit of rabble-rousing and to say the opportunity is ours to lose in terms of what we have in front of us in terms of challenges, but also what we have in front of us in terms of opportunities, right? My father liked to, in his very distant way, think of things in terms of SWOT analyses. Those of you in the financial or business world probably know, right? That's your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. When I came to the nonprofit world through a misadventures, it was because I was a practicing public interest attorney, but I saw there was a desperate need in Montana to do essentially what the Clark Fork Coalition started on that side of the divide for the Columbia, but I did not see it happen for the Missouri's headwaters. And why is that important? Well, number one, I came here, of course, because as a youth, I wanted to ski, I wanted to hike, I wanted to rock climb, I wanted to ice climb, I wanted to be Alex Lowe, I wanted to do all those things, but as we know from Monkey Wrench Gang, I wanted to save 51% of myself to enjoy it before it was gone. That has transformed. I now have children, I have liabilities, I have responsibilities, but more importantly, the steam is still there to create a better reality, either using the tools that exist on our tool belt today or creating new defenses in the future that will protect the values we hold dear. And why is that happening in Montana? I want to start with the classic funnel technique. When I often get in front of either a court and a judge or in front of an audience of folks that I don't know personally, I like to think, what's my roadmap? Where is this guy going and how long is it going to take? Well, let me tell you exactly what we're doing. We're going to talk about three concepts. I first want to talk about why it matters that we're trying this experiment, and I do think it's an experiment in Montana, about saying there has to be a meaningful tension and balance between local control and state prerogatives. I want to talk about that. What does our Constitution mean? How does that actually tangibly make a difference for you here tonight and near term in the future? Number two, I want to talk about some of the real challenges we have in front of us. I want to talk about the insatiable appetite for development pressure and how we have players in the game in our backyards and communities, and I am a taxpayer in Gallatin County, God help me, please help me. What does that mean for the future, and what can we do to change the status quo for the better, right? And that's just not economic, that's also social, it's environmental, it's ecological. And then number three, I want to talk about some of the very real problems that have happened at the legislature and what that bodes for us here on the ground, for you in your neighborhoods, in your backyards, and for those of you looking down the pipe of Crazy Mountain Ranch, other exponential expansions, seeing multinational corporations coming in with billions of dollars and very highly trained attorneys. What does that mean, right? What are the tools in your tool belt? Because in the end, if we do not educate ourselves about both what the facts are, indisputable facts, also what our rights and obligations are, and we do not come up with a collective strategy that aligns with our values, we are dead in the water. So that is the opportunity for us tonight, is to talk about those three interrelated concepts, and let's start broad, right? So first and foremost, you need to know a little flavor about me. I am an accidental activist. Am I an activist? I don't think of. I think I'm actually a pragmatist, and yet I'm castigated as an environmental activist in Montana. And the irony is, I went from a sheep farm in Montana, not knowing a thing about anything else, raised on a family farm, and I went to Pepperdine in Malibu, California, sight unseen, on a full ride, right? And was dumped in Malibu and said, yeah, figure it out, play water polo and figured out surfing, and I got a staph infection surfing during a red tide. Now, why is this relevant for those of you that know the beautiful county of Los Angeles? Well, it's relevant because that county allows combined sewer overflows of raw sewage into the ocean every time it rains more than 0.25 inches. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because I had a piece of my leg cut out, but it saved my leg, right? We prevented a MRSA staph infection. But it also told me at the ripe age of 19 years old, being a poli-sci degree, which in the early 2000s, you know what that meant. He doesn't know what he wants to do yet, right? What it told me was, holy smokes, we're allowed as municipalities that have hundreds of millions of dollars to dump raw sewage into the ocean, and this is the stuff that I care about, right? I grew up on a sheep farm mucking irrigation ditches, digging post holes, putting creosote in the bottom of my posts, stretching them tight, whacking the ram with a wood post. That was my background. And then I'm there getting stuff cut out of my leg, and I'm thinking, why is this even possible? I thought I was in California. This is the promised land. And this is all relevant to our discussion tonight, because guess what? I learned from local citizen activists there in of all things, Santa Monica Baykeeper. They told me, did you know that that's illegal? Did you know that there are actually federal and state laws on the books that prohibit these counties, municipalities, and corporate entities from putting pollution in the water and making you sick? Did you know that the reason that you just got sick is because we've never enforced the rules that exist today, that we're not using very basic, common sense public health and environmental protections? What did that do to a nascent 19-year-old? Well, it made me start to thinking, well, damn, what do I give a crap about? Well, I just want to work for Surfrider and surf, 8 hours of the day, and then I'll do a little dabbling on the side. But that genesis led me to Vermont law. It led me to the School of Forestry. It led me to a master's and a JD. And here I am 20 years later, almost to the day, in Montana. And what I really care about is this idea of what is the legacy that we have in front of us, and what are the tools to protect that legacy for the values we care about? That's where I am. That's why I'm here. That's why I think most of you are here. And when I think about Montana and what it means to me, I think not as a lawyer necessarily, not even as a farmer growing up on a family farm. I think of it based upon the things that we actually all give a damn about and we can get along about and smile when we see each other in the grocery store. And for me, that means our water, our wildlife, and our Western way of life. Now, what does that actually mean in tangibles? It means to me that we need to have sideboards on how and why we do business, right? It means that we're respecting the common values and the decencies over which this society in Montana has grown. And I don't have much hope for DC in the near future, but I do have hope for Montana. And why is that? It's because we have a public trust doctrine in Montana. And equally important, we have a very important private property rights that are enshrined in both water rights and they're enshrined in our Constitution. And I think that these are actually simpatico, right? They're not at odds. This isn't about villains. What we're actually talking about right now is a right way and a wrong way to do business. And it's not a question of if we're going to grow. We are going to grow. But we need to be very realistic about putting sideboards and using those tools in our tool belt to condition how and where we grow and how that occurs. Because it's not enough to say no. In 2025, it's not enough to say no. It's about having a solution. And what we have an opportunity to do in Park County and elsewhere in Southwest Montana is to figure out how and where we grow and to condition that meaningfully. And I would offer in Montana, we have a unique opportunity to empower both local government and our state government, and largely ignore the federal government, and figure out what we can do in the near term to protect the things that we all value. And that's going to be your neighbors. It's going to be your drinking water supply. It's going to be the wildlife and the elk herd that you've looked at for who knows how many years. And it's going to be your ability to go out on a hot summer day, jump off of a bridge into a river and not have an algae bloom, and probably to catch one of those awesome wild trout that we have, right? These are some of the colloquial values that we all care about, that we want to share with our friends and family, but they are also equally at risk of going away right now. And it is not because of a single issue out there. It is because we are in the midst of a massive grab for power. We are in the midst of what I like to call the Copper Kings 2.0. We are in the midst of the land barons, right? This is about power and making money. And we have not seen something like this since, again, let's go back. Those who do not learn from history are bound to repeat it. It's the oldest axiom in the book. And I think in Montana, the number one thing that we have to remember right now is that we have a system of laws on the books that really bestows a lot of power on those that own land. And there is not as quite a clear pathway in terms of what local government or state government can do to condition that. And simultaneously, in the last 3 legislative sessions, we have seen complicity from our legislature in empowering those that have land above and beyond the constituents to which theoretically they report. So why is this all important? We're getting to my point number 2, right? What are the tools in our tool belt? What are we going to do in the near future? I would say that the main opportunity that we have in front of us right now is to think very much so about what has worked for us, what has not worked for us, and also where do we need to go in terms of our SWOT analysis. When I think about Park County, when I think about Gallatin County, when I think about Beaverhead County, when I think about more rural aspects of Madison County, one of the number one things that I think about is, boy, what are the values that make these counties so valuable, that keep me raising 3 children here, that make me want to stay here and not only raise those children, but invest my personal time, effort, TLC into making something better? It's because, frankly, I think it's worth it, but also we have the opportunity to turn that tide. And when I think about those challenges and this dissonance of where does the law currently stand versus where it needs to be, I end up going back into this activist mold, not so much the attorney mold, but more the activist mold of saying, what did our constitutional founders think in 1972? And I like to read that stuff, and maybe that just shows that I'm a dork, right? And that's all right. But I think more to the point that you should know is that as a Montana citizen, they actually enshrined a really good balancing act, talking about where the power lies, but also what the tools in your tool belt are. And I think one of the key things we have in front of us is this idea of focusing on what can we do to quantify and to measure. As the saying goes, it's really hard to manage what you can't measure, right? So we need to measure a lot of what's in front of us. And I would offer a lot of that has to do with water resources and our land and our wildlife. But also, what do we need to do to put sideboards? Right? It's not just enough to say no. It's about saying how and why and where and how do we do it. It's about conditioning things in a way that balances our inalienable rights. It's not just about a penultimate right to develop how and where you want and to profit off of a landscape. It has to be conditioned in a meaningful way based upon the constituency and based upon our democratic process. Now, what does that actually look like, right? I would offer that when you heard a little bit from Randy saying the Broadwater case was a great sounding board that finally addressed in part the exempt well battle, when I think of it, actually, I think of it as the tip of the spear, right? It's just the starting point, or maybe the right analogy is the tip of the iceberg. That really what we have in Montana is a loophole, an exception to the rule that has swallowed, in fact, the rule. And I want to get really geeky with you for a minute at that 30,000 foot as an attorney and say, why do, when you hear this word exempt wells, should you go like this? You should recoil from it. Why is that? Well, number one, it's an affront to your private property rights. Number two, it's stealing water that otherwise is left to the benefit of wildlife that I think we all care about. Number three, it's absconding government authority to protect our public trust and to protect that clean and healthful environment for the next generation. And why do we need to figure out solutions at both the state level and the local level in terms of how and where do we develop? Well, because in the end, development can't occur unless you're able to flush your toilet and turn on your tap, right? It's your Achilles heel. I focus on water because I had a staph infection 20 years ago that the doctors cut out and told me that we actually have laws in the books that prevent this, but nobody's doing their job in enforcing those rules. And what good's a rule if you can't enforce it? That's what got me started. Where am I at today, 20 years later? Boy, I'm at a place in time where I think we have a right to not just a clean and healthful environment. Let's break that down. I think we have a right to government that's by and for the people. I think we have a right to balancing those pursuits of having private property, but also having business done in a way that doesn't harm everyone else around you and harm the quality of your neighborhoods. Now, let's talk a little bit about that Horse Creek Hills case, because I think it is important to setting the context of what the tools in your tool belt are today, but also what the legislature has done. And I do need to rant a little bit because I'm deeply concerned by what the legislature has done in the last legislative session. What the Horse Creek Hills case really established is two things. Number one, you can't just keep on aggregating the use of multiple exempt wells. In 2014, we had a seminal case that came out of the district court, and then the Supreme Court ruled and said essentially, look, you can't just keep on playing fast and loose with definitions of groundwater and thinking everything is mythically not tied to surface water. These are senior water rights, these are property rights. We have to come up with a way that limits those uses. And you're supposed to come up with this idea of saying, if you're doing a subdivision, you get a limit, and the legislature has established that limit. Now, while today we can debate, I don't like exempt wells and we shouldn't have any or not, what that really codified is there's a limit. But our state government, having no backbone, and this is under governors both red and blue, they absconded and they moved forward and they started aggregating, came up with new loopholes, mostly at the bequest of developers. And what did they do? They created new loopholes. And so what my case did is declared for the first time that you can't just keep on combining these. Now, that really makes a big difference, because if you think about it in terms of how much water is actually needed for development, right? A family of four, the classic model, it actually takes maybe 22 homes before you're at your limits. Add in some irrigation for your 1 acre lawn and you're diminishing the value of that subdivision as a whole. Now, why is this important? Because now you only get 1 10 acre foot a year. So it's not a cap on development as much as to say, we're finally getting back to what the law has required for a long time. And that's a starting point. Now, the other thing that's really important for everybody here to understand is that we had for the first time a court in Montana say, local county government has a role in independent duty, separate from our natural resource agencies, to look at those offsite impacts. So what does it mean when we're putting in, just hypothetically, a 100-lot subdivision, and right next door is a guy that's been watering his alfalfa fields for 100 years? You have a perennial stream that has a trout habitat, and you have wildlife that come through there. Well, guess what? The law has required in Montana for the longest time that they're supposed to, at the county level, evaluate those impacts. And I would argue that what the court came down and said is, look, the county has to do that work. You have to do the homework. You have to look at the impacts before you make a decision, which is ultimately very reasonable. Know the impacts. Look before you leap. Very similar to our Montana Environmental Policy Act. That was enshrined in a unique piece of code applicable solely to counties, and yet we've never enforced it. And ultimately, that court case resulted in what I would offer is a really good thing, which is a very firm backstop for county government to say, look, developers, do the homework. If you think that you're allowed to develop, show me how it won't negatively affect our environment, our neighbors, our quality of life, the values. Now, why is this all relevant to the legislature? We're going to go forward, right? Well, the legislature has amended many of the different statutes in the books. And this is also getting to ultimately what I think we all need to do, which is we need to organize. And the legislature has amended several sections of the Montana Subdivision Policy Act. They've amended portions of what's called the Sanitation Act. And essentially, they've come up with a whole new schema that says we're essentially letting government agencies do a very short, myopic review, and local government doesn't have an ability to look at any of their expert reviews, and they're very much so constrained. You're not allowed to look at off-site water impacts qualitatively or quantitatively at the local government level anymore. Now, let me remind you, I'm a practitioner of water law in Montana, water quality, water quantity. I'm deeply concerned by that as a citizen. I'm deeply concerned by that as a practitioner. Why? Because in the end, I think a Republican democracy at its most basic, that's local government. That's not your state government. That's not people in DC. It's your local government. They're responsible to you, and they should be embodying the values that you seek, and you should be voting them out to the extent they don't. So where are we at today? Well, the legislature has constrained local government control, and it's not just in this way, it's in many different ways. And I think that's a really big negative for you, but it's also not a means for despair, right? You also still have tools in your tool belt. Right now, if there's a new preliminary plat proposed for a residential subdivision, it's not a simple question of we need housing. Rather, it still becomes nuanced. You still have an ability to participate. And to the extent you've never participated in these proceedings, you really ought to. And you ought to talk to Randy about them, because government still is by the people. And you have an opportunity, and they have to reconcile the specific concerns that you bring up. So I would offer one of the takeaways from tonight, from me as an attorney that has successfully litigated the responsibility of local and state government to look at these concerns, is that you need to get involved. It is no longer enough to talk in the bar or at Katabatic or to talk with your friends at a dinner party. You need to get involved at the local level of government and to express your voice. And you need to get your neighbors to do it too. And that this is not something that's confrontational. Instead, this is you speaking up for the heritage that you give a damn about. This is your tax dollars. They should work for you. So speak up. That's lesson 1. Lesson 2. We really need to think much more broadly about what is the legacy that we're trying to create right now. Once you pave over type R1 soil, once you put in the proverbial Walmart, once you put in the strip malls, the subdivisions, and you don't think comprehensively about it, you have lost the amenities that are the natural resource amenities of that landscape. They are not coming back. Our wildlife are resilient, but they cannot be simply pushed and pushed and pushed. And part of our outdoors legacy, part of the public trust heritage in Montana to which you are legally entitled, is the idea that there is responsibility on every level of our state government, every elected official, to protect and maintain that environment. And just because we don't have a clear pathway in terms of how best we protect it, doesn't mean we all need to sit around and say this has to be a solely 100% consensus-based debate. Rather, what you need to do is come together and demand accountability starting at a small, replicable scale. What I would offer as a lesson for Park County, what I'm trying to do at Upper Missouri Waterkeeper, is trying to figure out where are some of the most egregious examples of abuses in our legal system that are threatening and privatizing our public trust resources, namely water, our wildlife, what have you. How do we come up with ways to re-envision and make the law work for us, the citizens, the people that pay taxes, for whom the government should be responsible, right? That's what we need to be thinking about. And we need to stop being afraid of what people are thinking about or what the legislature is or is not doing. And we need to be thinking about what we, the people on the ground, and our neighbors and our communities give a damn about. And we need to make sure our government is responsive to that. Because I truly do believe, after living in Montana for almost 20 years, every place I go, once people get past the fact that I'm an attorney and an environmentalist, we often agree on more things than not. And mostly we agree on the value of our outdoors heritage. We agree on the concept of clean, readily available water. And we agree on the ideal of orderly development that doesn't just happen based upon whom has the money, has the power, but based upon a public, thoughtful process that has sideboards, right? And that's what I think we have the opportunity to talk about. And that's what I think this opportunity for Park County largely is. How do we come up with specific plans that are replicable to protect some of the most sensitive resources that we all care about? When I think about Park County in particular, of course, the Yellowstone runs through it, but also we need to remember that it's not just about the stone, it's about the groundwater resources, right? And while we can do good things through many different aspects that can be good faith, we need to have firm, enforceable sideboards on how and where we develop and how some of the most pervasive threats that are also the most far-reaching in terms of their cumulative impacts, we need to have firm science-based sideboards that are nonpartisan that help guide us. That is the opportunity in front of this organization, in my mind. That is the opportunity in front of the larger conservation community. That is the opportunity in front of folks that care about a Republican democracy, is that we need to agree upon what we agree upon. We need to make it abundantly clear to our elected leaders what that is, and then we need to think innovatively, creatively, and unrelentingly, and advocate for those rights. And we need to use an all-of-the-above approach. That litigation is just a means to an end, right? I happen to be the lead attorney on that case that secured an important step forward, but frankly, I'd much rather prefer that we don't have to go to court. I would much rather prefer that we end up with these comprehensive solutions that are locally based, locally driven, and adopted willingly by our local leaders and give us that clear roadmap of saying, this is how we protect our type 1 soils, this is how we protect our source water, this is how we protect the groundwater that is the most important inflows, that is cold, clean for our streams and rivers, this is how we protect our wildlife corridors. But right now, what do we have? I think this is the time of the doom and gloom for my conversation, right? We have something very different. We have county land use planning, particularly in Gallatin County, which as a private citizen, I'm very chagrined about. We talk about transportation networks, building out 6-lane highways, and yet they're disconnected from the idea of walkable communities or about protecting the public trust amenities, such as our wildlife or water. We have this conversation, and yet we disagree with and largely don't reflect upon 60 years of empirical data showing if you do not solve transportation networks, you do not solve this idea of walkable, livable local communities and doing densification in the right place in the right time with infrastructure to support it, that you create and incentivize sprawl. And where is Montana today? We are continuing down the same path of metropolitan sprawl that so much of the Midwest has seen, and we don't have the luxury of buffers. We are losing our wildlife today, we are losing our water resources today, we are losing our outdoor amenities today, and they do not just magically come back. So why am I telling you all these things and doing a little bit of the yin and the yang? I'm telling you because there is no time like the present to get engaged. There is no time like the present to talk to your elected officials, to not be afraid of what they think about you, but rather to say, you should be thinking about what me and my neighbors think about you and your performance on the job. We need to be giving them a roadmap as a concerned constituency and as a community of people that think at the hydrologic and the watershed scale about comprehensive solutions that say not just no, but say this is the right way to grow and this is how we do it in accordance with best science, and it's a nonpartisan decision. This is about protecting our outdoors heritage. This is about protecting our wildlife. This is about protecting the things that we give a damn about and we're spending our tax dollars on, right? That's a very simple, clear message, but the opportunity is ours to lose. We need to do it now, we need to do it clearly, and we need to make sure that we are organized at the community scale, and we need to carry that battle forward, not just from the community level at the municipal and the county, but we need to start taking that back and regain the Montana legislature and have some common sense again. Because let me just be very clear, I have a list here, and I'm not gonna bore you because you really would be bored. I have 13 bills that were passed that are either directly contrary to the Federal Clean Water Act, and let's be very clear, state law does not trump federal law. Federal law occupies the space. We are abandoning science-based guidelines and tests for even understanding pollution. We are abandoning the idea of knowing the impacts of where and how we develop ahead of time. We are tying the hands of our state regulatory agencies in terms of their ability to even ask questions about what are the off-site impacts on water, land, air, wildlife before they approve things. We are tying the hand of local government in terms of its ability to condition how and where we develop. We are incentivizing sprawl in areas that do not have the carrying capacity ecologically to sustain it. These are deeply concerning subject matters that are not just esoteric scientific issues. They will, in fact, diminish your private property rights. They will take your tax dollars, and they will diminish our livability, the things that we all care about here. And it is on us to work at the local level and to empower local conservation groups to make sure that we have a united front when we come back to our decision makers at every level and say, this is unacceptable. We need to fix these challenges. And this is a place worth fixing, by the way, right? That this is a place that we're not just investing in and living in and giving to the next generation, but we need to make sure that we are building that replicable path, and it needs to start locally. So when I look at the miasma of nonsense that's out there, right? The cacophony from Washington, D.C., the nonsense with the electoral cycle that seemingly is unending with the billions of dollars being spent, and then I think about local elections. In the end, the adage always sticks with me, and I was told this when I was a poli-sci major at Pepperdine. Guess what? All change is really local, and in the end, it's more important to be engaged in local elections and local government than it is to change the oil in your truck. And I believe that 20 years later, right? That it's more important to make sure that you establish connections and create a clear roadmap of what you care about, but also where you want to go as a community at your local government, because in the end, they are your advocates, and they are the people that give a damn, and they're your neighbors, right? So in the end, let's come together. I would offer, from my perspective, the best measuring stick we have is going back to Aldo Leopold. What's good for the biological integrity of our outdoors, right? That is, in fact, what's good policy. Because when we protect our outdoors, we're protecting our public health, we're protecting our economics, we're protecting our social structure, and we're benefiting the next generation, our children, our children's children. So with that, I would say there's no better time than the present. You need to get engaged. You should do the all of the above approach. Support the activists, support the voluntary approaches, and also, most importantly, work with the local groups that are trying to gain entree and create roadmaps based on science, based on experience with your local decision makers, and change the rules to benefit the values you actually care about. Make your tax dollars work for you. Thank you.
So we have a little time for questions.
Okay.
I am going to, questions for you, not me. I'm going to ask a few questions just to kind of get this started off. So, Guy, let's be hopeful for a moment. What would be your positive vision for the future of water and our land in Park County?
He gave me these questions ahead of time this afternoon, thank God. I may or may not have been writing a brief about the state not doing its job on the Big Hole River, and so that's nice that I get a little heads up. So what do I think about when we're talking about positive vision for the water future of Park County? Number one, first and foremost, I really think we need to be talking about protecting those most vital resources for both wildlife and for humans, right? As much as I might be a follower of Rousseau, and I think that humans, in the end, philosophically, we would all want to help each other when we're down and out, we need to make sure that we are protecting human health and we're protecting the environment. It's not an either or, it needs to be both, right? They should be parallel tracks. So where does that come to first? I think the first suggestion would be we need to do source water protection, and we need to have that codified. When I talk about source water protection, I'm not just talking about drinking water supplies, but I'm talking about understanding the character of our hydrology. Now, in this state, over 20 years ago, the Montana Supreme Court recognized that as a matter of water resources law, water rights, there's no such thing. It's a fallacy to say that hydrology of groundwater is separate from our rivers, right? So we've known that as a matter of law. But guess what? That apparently doesn't play with our qualitative agencies. And likewise, many of the edicts from our federal government are never faithfully implemented because we don't have resources, there's no political will, or there's never any funding to follow through. So what's one of the first things we would do? We need to identify what are the most sensitive reaches of this county in terms of source water protection for both public health and for your wildlife, and you need to figure out what are the tools in your tool belt to protect those areas, right? And these can be drawn on a hydrologic cycle. You have experts, many of which are in this room, that can help you understand that, but you need to be focusing on protecting those most vital resources. Number two, we need to be focusing on setting better standards of care of how and where we develop. And this gets to the point of, at least for myself, I don't think it's about saying just no development. I don't think that's realistic. We are, in fact, a capitalist economy, as much as I might not like it, right? I don't like some of the outcomes of the capitalism, but I do think you can put meaningful conditions on how and where we develop that can benefit the natural environment and can protect biodiversity. And one of the best ways that we've never exercised is this idea of saying, what is our urban growth boundary in Livingston? And also, where else do we want to develop? Where is that megafauna or biodiversity that we need to protect? And using the tools in our tool belt, some of which are under the Montana Water Quality Act, some of which are under the Federal Clean Water Act, to protect those very special areas that protect those most resources that are most valuable and sensitive. So that's where I would start, because I think that's where you get bang for your buck. But also, to my point earlier, these are replicable models with existing tools. They've just not been explored, and we've never tried them. So why not try them now, and why not use nonpartisan science to come up with these good examples of protecting the things that ostensibly are good economically, they're good ecologically, and they're good socially, and they're going to benefit the private property interests, they're going to benefit the downstream users, and they're going to benefit the things that are hard to quantify, such as our wildlife heritage, right? And if we don't do them now, we also equally know what the consequences are. They will slip through your fingers. And once they're gone, our wildlife heritage does not come back. And neither does water magically replenish that well. So Ben Franklin said it best, when the well runs dry, well, you know the worth of water. Let's not get to that point.
All right, I'm gonna one more and then we'll turn it over to you all. So the year is 2026. You are a Park County Commissioner. In 2 minutes, what would you do to protect the water, wildlife, agriculture, and rural landscape of Park County?
I'm not going to mention the dirty zoning word, right? No, rather, I think in no facetiousness, we need a systematic approach that has an action plan, right? I think that if I was a county commissioner, first and foremost, we need to be developing and implementing an action plan based upon, again, the tangibles. Where are the most sensitive water resources that need protection? How do they benefit particular constituencies or values that our taxpayers care about? And then we need to be implementing them based upon nonpartisan, independent science. I think a classic example, there was a High Country News article perhaps a year or two ago that really delved into an eastern county in Montana that had developed a water budget for its groundwater aquifer, which undisputably fed all the local creeks and streams, was the primary supply for all the senior water rights and the primary agricultural users, but also supplied the municipality. This is an example, I think, that frankly is sorely missing. And I think about the analogous examples in Gallatin County, which is to say we have a vast groundwater aquifer that comes off the Gallatin Range, similar to the Absaroka. But at the same time, without an understanding of quantifying it, understanding place of use and how it connects with our water rights system, what are we left with? Well, it's left with this like penumbra of questions about, does it really matter? Well, there's plenty of groundwater available if I drill a well. Can't I just use it? But we have to be able to quantify these resources. So I think one of the number one things I'd be focusing on is understanding where is the water physically available, where is it legally available, and coming up with means to quantify it so that I can make evidence-based decisions that condition how and where we develop to protect the things that my constituents all care about.
And I'm assuming you would say the same thing about wildlife, right? Understand where it is and where the most sensitive areas are. Am I right there?
That's right, and we have tools in our tool belt today to establish those conditions.
Yeah, a little bit of time for questions. Anybody out there have a question for Guy? David?
Why don't you mention the Z word? When you're talking about what commissioners ought to be doing, that was the question.
I think zoning is a certain tool in your tool belt. Countywide zoning and prioritizing highest and best uses is great. I don't think we ever get to that conversation if you don't have buy-in from the supermajority of your constituency. If you think in Park County that you could get a supermajority of your constituency to support that, you need it. And this is based upon a very fundamental concept, which is what good is a zoning policy if it can be stripped a year down the road when the county commission changes? What is the bill that was just passed where citizen-initiated zoning can be stripped based on a quorum of county commissioners now? So it's not that zoning can't be powerful. It's not that it can't reflect values on the ground, including natural resource values. It's that these things can become temporary, and they're a means to an end. So what I would really offer is probably the most important thing is knowledge about where are the fundamental aspects of our human existence and our wildlife that we all care about. How do they have that Venn diagram where they overlap? And then what are the tools in our tool belt to codify, quantify those values? And then how do we come up with tools to protect those most important resources? And again, I think about this in terms of humans cannot survive more than 72 hours in hot times without water. So we need to have clean drinking water. We also need to make sure our rivers are running clean. That's also part of the outdoors economy, and it's a huge part of our agrarian economy. So coming up, again, from a water resource perspective, focusing on quantifying what we have, and then using that information to influence and condition any prospective development, commercial, institutional, industrial scale. Those are solid tools that are enshrined in state law right now, and it's not going to result in a fight. All we need to do is ask the right questions about understanding that resource and then protecting it with existing tools. Zoning should be a part of the conversation, but I'd like to use the other tools right now that focus on the resource that I hold most dear, which is going to be the water resources side.
And David, I'll say it, Francis Park County will say it, the Z word, zoning, it's simply where are the appropriate areas for different types of growth, where are inappropriate areas for different types of growth. It's not that complicated. We'll say it, that's what we need in Park County, in our opinion. A question? Tim?
I have a comment and a question.
Okay.
One is, we have crossed the threshold with the appropriateness of talking about zoning in this county, and zoning wins here, countywide. We just had a vote on it, and we should have no fear talking about zoning, because the majority of people here are with us, even in the county. Just go look at the vote that we just had. Second one is, your legal win in Broadwater County sounds kind of landmarky to me, and I remember when it came out, I was like, cool. Is it if and or when that victory is going to ripple out and affect the rest of the state, or like where is it in the process of getting whomever to apply that to other municipalities?
30 seconds, go. What that case really stands for is that today, if you choose and you want to actually review county preliminary plats when they start coming in with Randy, what you need to look for is how do they define what's called adequate water supply? And you're going to look at what is their water source. Are they bringing a water right to the table? And if they're not bringing a water right to the table, there's very few other ways they can do it. It's usually an exempt well, which means all you're looking for is how many are they claiming they can use. If it's anything more than the value of one, you should have a red flag go up, and that's the precedent of my case more than anything else. And the legislature hasn't successfully monkeyed with that, which is new preliminary plats for major or minor subdivisions are entitled to 1 10-acre foot a year of water. No more, no less. Anything more is blatantly unlawful, and you will win in court.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up with Tim on your comment, not your question, real quick. And pardon me, he's talking about a supermajority of citizens who are supporting regulatory approaches before you move forward with it. We're confident we already have that. There are 4 quality polls that have been done in Park County, remarkable for a county of its size. And I mean quality, I mean scientific polls, relatively low margin of error. This is what people care about. They really care about their future, and they will support some measures from the county to protect this great place. I am really confident of that the people will support it. Anybody else? Ken?
Guy, thank you very much. I'll have some more comments when I do my closing comments. But to bring it back to Park County, written in the Billion Gazette on the 21st about Crazy Mountain Ranch and its illegal appropriation of water.
Ken, you gotta speak up.
Monica Trammell wrote an article called Crazy Gulf Water about a week ago. Can you give us a telescopic view of just the water issue, but a 30,000-foot overview of the issues we here in Park County are facing with what Crazy Mountain Ranch is doing?
Crazy Mountain Ranch is illegally using water for a beneficial use that is not approved by its actual place of use. So that constitutes a technical unlawful use of water. Yes, it owns a majority of water rights to the reservoir. Yes, it owns water and can use it, but it's not approved to use it at that time for that place. So technicalities are the heart of law. What are the injuries? We can all argue in a court of law. I think the biggest issue is when we start to have big water rights users start to abuse their privileges and start to use it in a time and place where it's not designed, it upends the apple cart in terms of the expectations and also the presumed benefits of how we're using water. And I want to remind us that we have this uncomfortable tension right now in Montana between private property, our water rights, private appropriation system of law, and then to what extent it feeds and sustains our rivers, right? Right now, the pendulum is, I would argue, 90% swung in terms of private property rights. We do not have a mandatory in-stream flow. We do not have a guaranteed mechanism to purchase appropriative rights for the public trust. We have voluntary systems, and I support those approaches. But I would offer, when you think about Crazy Mountain Ranch and what they're doing right now, it is the tip of the iceberg in terms of what can happen when you start to have billion-dollar hedge funds start to purchase and gobble up large quantities of the county. And they start to abuse those prerogatives and not listen to their neighbors and frankly tell their neighbors, go pound sand, sue me if you want, I've already lawyered up. You know, that doesn't sound like a neighborly conversation to me. And it's also about exercising raw power. And that's not necessarily the legacy and the approach that I would want from my neighbors, but also I think there's going to be significant negative consequences from that. So, is it unlawful? Yes. Is there an enforcement mechanism? To be determined.
One more question, and then I think Ken will close. We've got 2 more questions. Wendy.
Just a comment. Thanks, Guy. This is super helpful. I think one thing, we're anxiously waiting the water budget study to come out. So that's been ongoing for about 3 years now, and it was supposed to have preliminary findings released last month, and they haven't come out. So we're kind of waiting on pins and needles to see what those findings are.
What's a water budget?
Correct.
That's what I referenced.
What is a water budget?
Oh, what Guy was talking about, understanding like
Quantifying.
what the inputs and the output, how much groundwater we have, how our irrigation infrastructure is connected to that, and how any changes in that overall system will,
Cascading consequences.
yeah, so.
Okay, we have a question back there.
Yes, this is all very highly technical language, and I have a doctorate, and I don't understand or know a lot about this. So one of my fears in having talked to some of the county commissioners, I didn't talk to all of them, but is their lack of education and understanding this stuff. If we needed you, Guy, to come talk to our county commissioners, would you be available to do that? I don't know if we could get them to open their ears, but to try to educate them to this stuff.
I'm always open to having those conversations. I think that in the end, there's a watershed divide when you go over the pass here, but more importantly, educating and informing our neighbors and our elected officials about what the tools in their tool belt are and encouraging them to use those tools. That's got to be the first approach, just like our children, right? You educate them, you give them the tools to make informed decisions. That's where we got to start. Oh.